Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunatu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace. And good evening, everyone. First, we have some sad news for us. The Swami that used to co-host this evening, we've actually been doing it together since 1990, I believe. Swami Abhedananda, better known as Shiva, he passed away on Monday at 3:10. So let's spend a moment or two of silence in remembrance of him and all the wonderful conversations that he gave us, both on Friday nights and in person at other times. At this point, I don't know exactly when the memorial service would be. We're looking into having a larger hall, and last I heard, we haven't quite heard back yet as to what day that hall might be available. So we will keep you informed through the newsletter. So hopefully, if you're interested, you've subscribed to our e-newsletter, and you'll get informed at that time. All right, we're continuing with Swami Abhedananda and the lecture on the ideal of education. So, Amma, do you want to start and read a paragraph? This is a little repeat of what we did last week, so we can kind of get into it again.
When Christ said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," he perhaps meant the same thing. But the Occidentals do not understand this meaning. We Orientals understand Christ better than the Occidentals do. The other day, I was talking with an Englishman in Calcutta, and he said that he had a theory that the Hindu mind could understand Christ better than the Occidentals. I said I share that belief because I know that the Occidental mind takes everything too literally, while Christ himself spoke in metaphors and parables which should be understood in the same way as that of the parables and metaphors of Buddha and Krishna. He replied, "Well, I believe you're right. So, my friends, we Hindus can give a new interpretation to the doctrines of Christianity, and perhaps a new interpretation to the ideals of other religions from the highest standpoint of our Vedanta."
Yes, I've certainly found that true over the years, that every once in a while we'll get somebody that comes and listens to a few lectures, maybe comes for a year or two, And they tell us, now I understand what they were saying in the Christian church much better than I did before. And it makes a lot more sense. Certainly, we each understand a scripture from our own background. So, and you find this in the different gospels too in Christianity, because each of the recorders of those gospels came from a slightly different economic and social status and part of the Middle Eastern world. And so they wrote from their perspective. And so you get a different slice from those teachings. And that's why you get those differences. And then, of course, if you look at the apocryphal Gospels, you're looking at another whole set of situations where people are writing from their standpoint. Of course, they've done studies on these things where you present a scenario to people. I mean, they do this in order to kind of test the reliability of eyewitnesses and things like that. And they'll present them with a scenario, and then they'll ask them about it later. And they'll find that the viewpoints are very different sometimes. And so you can see that we don't always get exactly what's happened in a situation from an eyewitness even, much less somebody that's heard something from somebody else and so forth. So I think I'll read a paragraph here. Vedanta means the highest wisdom, and it does not mean any book. Veda means wisdom, while anta means end. The word wisdom is derived from the same Sanskrit root vid, to know, and end is derived from anta. You will be surprised to know that most of the English words that we use now in our colloquial conversation had their origins in Sanskrit words. Now, that's a bit of an exaggeration. I wouldn't say most, but there are a lot. The word father in Latin is pater. In Greek, pater is in Sanskrit pitar. The word mother in Latin is mater. It is in Sanskrit matar. The word brother in Sanskrit is bratar. The word daughter is in Sanskrit duhitar. The same name is in our Sanskrit. The word name is in Sanskrit naman, and the word serpent is in Sanskrit sarpa. The word path is in Sanskrit pata. The word soup is in Sanskrit supa. The word bond is in Sanskrit banda. And the word punch is in Sanskrit pancha, which means 5. And the punch, which the Europeans drink, is called so because it's made of 5 ingredients. And I think that's why we say that when you punch like this, you've got 5 fingers doing that. So that's probably why that's called a punch. Not positive about that, but I think I heard that somewhere. All right. Therefore, my friends, you can trace most of these English words into Sanskrit roots. Aesop's fables and the Pillai's stories were based upon the stories from the Hitopadesha. All these animal stories originated in India and traveled westward into Europe. Thus you see that the culture of the ancient Hindu people was great, and during the Buddhistic age, the culture was improved in various lines. Here you had the Nalanda University. Do you know what that university was like? 10,000 students used to live there. We read a description of that Nalanda University in the writings of the Chinese writer Huang Zhuang. Just guessing at that. That's close. Anyway, didn't get to go to his university. Oh, but before we go on, I'll just make a comment about those fables and so forth. Comparative mythologists and Jungian psychologists are very interested in fairy tales, so they'll look at the different versions of a particular fairy tale, so something like Cinderella, and you'll find versions all over the globe. that have some of the basic same elements that you find in the Cinderella story, for example. But you can see how there's a cultural twist, from each one. And sometimes there's a significant change in the particular story. And then, of course, we're all familiar with like the Disney versions, which also put their own twist on it for modern times.
Would you like me to continue?
You want to read a little bit about the university? Now that I've gotten through Hiwung Twang. Okay.
Tsang, who lived there for many years, he said that from 100 pulpits, instructions were given every day to different classes of students, and that no student disobeyed the orders of the university or its rules and regulations during the 700 years of its existence. Now think of the discipline which the Nalanda University had. I went to see the ruins of Taxila University. There also several thousand students used to live. The Chinese scholars used to come and study various branches of science and philosophy from the Hindu teachers. The principal of the Nalanda University was Silabhadra, the teacher of Wansong, who was a Bengali from Gouda, the then capital of Bengal. Dipankara, whose birthplace was Vajrayogini in Rampur in East Bengal, was a great philosopher who went to Tibet to preach the gospel of Buddha. Buddhist preachers also went to Egypt, China, and Japan. At one time, the inhabitants of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa were all Buddhists, and Biharis and Bengalis were brothers who had one Magadhi language. The Jagannath Temple in Orissa was the temple of the Buddhists. There was no caste distinction, and all were brothers. That brotherliness should be revived once more. At that time, of course, Islam had not risen. Christianity was not there. But still, the idea of universal brotherhood was preached by Buddha and even Krishna, who antedated Buddha, declared in a trumpet voice before the work.
The world. I think it's supposed to be world.
Oh,
I
right,
think we're missing a letter in our version.
And then there's a Sanskrit quote.
Yeah, and the translation of the Sanskrit is, "He is a pundit, a true philosopher and a scholar who can see the same universal spirit in a well-cultured Brahmin, in a cow, in an elephant, in a dog, and in a pariah. That has been our ideal, but the people have forgotten it, and selfishness has crept in where selfishness and brotherly feelings should prevail. We learn in our Sanskrit primer," quote, this is from the Bhagavad Gita, "This is mine or this is yours. Such distinction is made by low-minded people, but those who are broad and liberal should consider the whole world as their relative. Did not Christ teach, love thy nature as thyself? If your neighbor be a pariah or a chandala or a Brahmin, or of any other religion, Christian or Islamic, him you should regard as your own self, and him you should love as you love your own self. This is our religion. Abandoning this ideal of universal religion, if we simply cultivate our intellect for commercial purposes, will that be the ideal of proper education?" So Swami Abhedananda here is making a case that the traditional Indian way of teaching, which emphasized spiritual values, is more important than the trend that was happening 100 years ago and is probably still continuing, where earning a living was the primary goal of education. Now, of course, earning a living and being able to support a family, if you're in a householder life, those are very important things. But along with that, we need education for the spiritual life. And of course, I always think that businesses that are run ethically with the idea of serving the customers that they're trying to get to buy things, that's really the way to build your business. If you're always looking how to cut corners and scrape off a nickel from the value of the product and charging more for it, making your bottle shaped funny so that you've got 1 ounce less and then charge more for it because it looks pretty, that kind of thing isn't serving your clients necessarily. And it's that's where this kind of commercialism creeps in. But if you're working for to create a good product, a product that will be of service to your customers, of benefit to your customers, then I think your business is going to grow naturally. You won't even have to work at it. So really there shouldn't be a thought of a conflict between trying to be commercial and trying to be spiritual. They should be the same thing. It should be one and the same, because the commercialism should be in an ideal of service, not just an ideal of making money.
Okay,
Do you want to read a little bit? Okay.
Where are we abandoning?
The next paragraph. Therefore, my friends. Yeah, it's the next couple sentences after abandoning.
Therefore, my friends, our national ideal should be brought forward and should be emphasized in every branch of our teaching. I do not mean any sectarian religion. I do not mean the worship of idols or iconoclastic ideas, but I mean the universal religion which underlies all sectarian religions, whether it be Islam or Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism. Among all special religions, there is an undercurrent of true religion, which is nameless and formless. And that nameless religion should be brought forward. The non-essential parts of every religion, that is, doctrines and dogmas, rituals and ceremonials, must vary according to the needs of the people. In dress, for instance, I may wear a turban. You may wear some other thing, a cap or a hat, but that does not change your soul or its nature, which is a part and parcel of the divine being. For this reason, education should be based upon universal principles and not upon sectarian religious ideals. It would otherwise be degrading the humanity. The object of education should be the attainment of perfection. That is the highest aim of education. In the Vedas, we read of two kinds of vidya, paravidya and aparavidya. Aparavidya is that which explains the laws of nature and describes the cause of various phenomena. But paravidya is that by which one attains to God consciousness, and that should be the aim of aparavidya. That is why you are studying all things. Why do you go to a chemical laboratory? You go to study the fundamental elements of all phenomena. Why do you study physics and all the different branches of science? You study to know how this world has come into existence. Why do you study anatomy, physiology? You study to understand how the organs of your system are working and coordinating in harmonious development, and how the body grows from a minute cell.
These are one of these paragraphs that goes on forever. I think he and Vivekananda were having a contest as to see who could write the longest paragraphs. Some of them really go on for a long time. But this is important, and some of the early significant people that came to this center, people like Aldous Huxley and Gerald Hurd, who was it, wrote the Perennial Philosophy? Was that Huxley, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, wrote the Perennial Philosophy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and those were the kinds of things that they were looking at the essential parts of religion, not the non-essential parts, and noticing that there was this underlying perennial philosophy, as he put it, that underlied all of these things. And that was really the message of Sri Ramakrishna. I mean, he did it in a very practical way, actually using the various prescriptions for spiritual life in these different paths, and showing that they led to the same goal. So that was the real laboratory experience of the similarity in the religions. And then these philosophers showed that there was also essential elements even in the philosophical underpinnings of them. And unfortunately, we tend to see externals. And of course, we do that even judging people. We tend to pigeonhole people by the way they dress, or the way they talk, or the way they do their hair, or so forth. Having lived a long time, I've seen the world change a lot, and that's changed a lot for the better, for a big extent, but not completely. But when I was growing up, pretty much everybody was expected to dress the same, and anybody with, if a guy had an earring or long hair, they were just, what's wrong with you? It's like they were some weirdo or something. And now people don't care. I mean, people can, men and women wear their hair with different colors and different styles and different things, all sorts of different styles. And people are very much more accepting of that, at least in California. Maybe it's not that way everywhere, but in California, things seem to be very accepting, and you don't stare at somebody because they're wearing a different kind of clothing. I can go to USC dressed in my Garo robes. Nobody turns a head. I mean, nobody even bothers to stare or look, or think, who's that strange person going? So it's very nice to see that people have gotten much more accepting and used to people and not judging of externals the way that they often did. He's going to continue here with Sri Jagadish Chandra Bose, has been studying the plant life. You have heard him speak of the wonderful truths which he had discovered. One of them is that the whole world, there is one life and not many. The life that is beating in us is pulsating in the plants and even in the blade of grass. As we eat, so the grass eats, and as we sleep, so the plants sleep. There is a gradual manifestation of life from the lower to the higher in the minerals, vegetable, and the animal kingdoms, and we should study them all so that our knowledge should be complete. We had a memorial, you could say, for John Dobson the other night. It was his birthday anniversary on Tuesday, and so several people gathered online and gave reminiscences. And Maria, who had worked with him on one of his books, showed a video clip of him talking about how he had gotten a hint of this from Swami Ashokananda. One time, Swami Ashokananda, in one of his inspired moments, he was a Swami at the San Francisco Center, where John had been a monk for many years. He suddenly said, "The universe, it's alive. The whole universe is alive." And it finally struck John one day that if you look at the characteristics of life as outlined by Erwin Schrödinger in his book, What is Life? He talks about how life has to direct a stream of negative entropy upon itself, which basically means it's got to have an energy source, and it's got to be able to get the energy source and use the energy source to do something. And then it has to, at some point in time, be able to reproduce. And then it cycles in. It has a life cycle. And a living organism will have a birth, and then it lives, and it directs a stream of negative entropy upon itself, and then it dies. And it has a barrier between it and the rest of the environment. And he says the universe is just like that. We have an observable universe that has a boundary to it. You can't know anything about anything that's more than the limits of the boundary of the observable universe, because anything going at the boundary is going away at the speed of light, and anything past that would be going away faster than the speed of light, and so it's not part of your universe. So the universe has a boundary, and in his model, it recycles the stuff that's going away from you, that you're seeing as going away from you at the boundary of the universe, becomes so uncertain about where it is, it recycles as fresh hydrogen somewhere else. So it recycles, and it directs a stream of negative entropy upon itself, because it recycles as fresh hydrogen, and the fresh hydrogen then is all wound up with lots of potential energy. It has the potential energy to fall together by gravity, heat up and become stars, and radiate energy as it goes through its various processes of nuclear fusion. So it has a cell membrane, and it directs a stream of negative entropy upon itself, and it keeps recycling, and it keeps going and repeating itself. So he pointed out that the whole universe is like one living organism, one huge organism. And he says if it weren't like that, we wouldn't be like that. We're the microcosm of the macrocosm. And so because the universe is like that, each cell is like that, and each organism is like that. You want to continue?
Yeah. Is it physically?
Yeah.
Physically, we should develop and train our bodies so that we can have muscles of iron and nerves of steel. Then we should educate our minds so that we may be able to acquire self-mastery and not remain slaves of passions, desires, and selfishness. Self-conquest should be our ideal in training our minds. In the West, there is psychology without a psyche, which means the soul. There, in the study of psychology, the existence of a psyche is not admitted. But Hindu psychology is far better. We should educate our intellect so that we can see the all-pervading spirit and reason that although there are various manifestations, yet there is an underlying unit of existence. Unity and variety is the plan of nature. And that plan we should discover by training our intellect. Furthermore, we should realize what is eternal and what is non-eternal, what is unchangeable and what is changeable. The world would be the function, that would be the function of the intellect, which is trained and has reached its ideal education.
Okay. There was something I meant to say earlier and forgot when they were talking about the Vedas having all knowledge in them. And I pointed that out when I was at USC. We had a puja for Ganesha, and I pointed out the importance of understanding that, because most of those students are in scientific fields. Most of them are in computer science, artificial intelligence, biomechanical engineering. So most of their professors are Western material atheists who have given up on religion. But I pointed out that in Hinduism, we've not had that problem. We don't separate the knowledge of science from the knowledge of religion. That they're all considered Veda, and a lot of those ideas are in the Vedas. So you find scientific ideas in some of the Vedas. And if you look at things symbolically, you can understand what they're saying. You can't expect them to be putting it in terms of modern scientific language. They didn't have modern scientific language. But they had language that was adequate to explain the mystical experiences. And when you probe into them deeply enough, you find that they had some very scientific and deep insights. And so we've never really had that problem. But of course, in the Western traditions, they've had to kind of dance around some of those problems, where some of the things that they assumed from the scriptures, thinking they were literal, it turned out that scientifically they just couldn't seem to be true. So it's been a bit tougher for them. And so then you find a lot of the scientific community just sort of giving up on religion. The dean of religious life there and I had a conversation about the debate about evolution. And we both pointed out that the people that argue against it and say that, religion is wrong and evolution is right, are all arguing from a standpoint of Western traditions. It's the Western traditions have it all wrong, but they never bother to look at the Buddhist traditions or the Hindu traditions or some of the other Eastern philosophical traditions that even have elements of that kind of evolution in them. There's slightly different kinds of terminology between Buddhism and Hinduism, but still they had that kind of idea put in metaphorical terms. So let's see, was there something else I wanted to say about this? Let's see. Oh, yes, yeah, when it talks about the changeable and the unchangeable. Again, John Dobson pointed out that the whole universe as a whole doesn't change. The amount of energy doesn't change. The amount of inertia doesn't change. The amount of angular momentum doesn't change. The amount of linear momentum doesn't change. There are all sorts of conservation laws in our physics. It says overall, it doesn't change. The amount of electrical charge doesn't change. You don't suddenly find more electrical charge in the universe as a whole. You can find it locally, but not as a whole. So as a whole, the universe isn't changing, but of course locally it appears to be changing all the time. And that's the element of Maya. Maya makes us see the things that are changing and ignore the unchangeable behind it all. You want to read another paragraph? We've got some time here.
Proper education should include moral training. The whole of ethics depends upon love, which means not selfish love, but the expression of oneness in spirit. If you love somebody, you become one with the beloved. Otherwise, there's no love. Love means the attraction of two souls, which would vibrate in the same degree and which would be tuned in the same key. Just as in a room, if two musical instruments are kept timed in the same key, when one is struck, the other responds.
I think that was probably supposed to be tuned, but it didn't translate correctly when we scanned it.
Right.
So, all right.
And so in the case with two lovers, when the thoughts and ideas which rise in the mind of the lover will vibrate in the mind of the beloved and produce similar response, then there is love. That means oneness of thought, in thought and in spirit. Again, where there is true love, there cannot be any selfishness. If you love anyone, you should be ready to give him all that you possess. Because you would say, "Oh, my brother, thy necessity is greater than mine. Whatever is mine is thine." We must learn to merge our small personality into the bigger personality of humanity. That should be the ideal of moral education, and spiritual education would reach its climax when the student would realize the truth of the saying, "I and my Father are one." Not physically one, not mentally, and not intellectually, but spiritually, we are one, because there is only one spirit in the universe. Therefore, each soul is a potential Christ, each soul is potentially divine, and each soul is Brahman. In any system of education, which is based upon the fundamental principle of potential divinity in the soul of the individual, we could be considered as the highest.
Yeah, this is a very important point, and I think this is the way some psychic healers work, and also some of the swamis that can intuit the problem of the disciple. They can tune into the vibration of the student or the client, as the case may be, and so that helps them to understand what's going on in the psyche of the student, because they can get their vibrations tuned in. There's actually a type of psychology that tries to do that as well. Forgotten what it's called now. but the therapist takes the kind of emotional state, tries to take the emotional state of the client. So if they're very depressed and they're sitting like this, then the therapist will also sit like this. But the therapist will then gradually change their attitude and their emotional state in order to help the client bring their emotional state back up. So first, get in tune, and then change the vibration. So I wish I could remember the name of that particular approach, but so this idea of tuning in to the vibrational level of somebody is very important. Of course, we don't encourage people to try to develop psychic abilities. It can be kind of problematical. And I know one devotee that said that when she was starting her meditation practice, that she started having clairvoyant kinds of experiences, and it was really a pain in the neck. She says, I don't want anybody else's thoughts in my head. I got enough of my own. So the Swami that she was learning from helped her to get over that. And I remember, I think I've mentioned this in previous classes, where there was a television show called The Psychic Challenge. And they started in one of these elimination contests where they had started out with 16 people, kind of like Iron Chefs or something. But they had psychic challenges rather than cooking challenges. And so they'd have to guess which car in a car lot had somebody in the trunk, or which room in an abandoned hotel or psych hospital had somebody sitting in it, or that kind of thing. And they'd always end going to a crime scene. And the interesting thing was that some of the people would be very good at one challenge and completely miss the next one. And so it just shows that it's not always a reliable gift that people have. They have a gift. They definitely had gifts because they could do things that were way beyond chance. And yet the next time they'd be just completely wrong, just completely off. So part of that is possibly due to conflicting vibrational energies. You go into a building, especially if it's an abandoned psych hospital or something like that, or a hotel where there have been thousands of people going through over the decades, there's going to be an awful lot of vibrational energy in there, and to sift it out and find exactly the right one is going to be rather difficult. There was one case I remember where they had three men sitting on horses, and they had to guess which one was the cowboy. They all missed it. None of them got it right. And two of them were sure that this one guy had a drinking problem, and he swore up and down he didn't have a drinking problem. I don't know why this came to me, but I just assumed that they were probably reading a past life. They were probably tuning into a different lifetime for this person. So I don't see any other reason why two psychics, independently of each other, they weren't hearing what the other ones were saying, came up with that same idea. So there had to be that kind of energy there somewhere. And it wasn't in the current life, so that must have picked it up from a past life or something. Anyway, so these things are all very interesting, but his point here is that there's really one life, as he was talking about Dr. Bose and doing experiments with plants. He did experiments with metals, too, and showed how you could fatigue a metal, and it showed the same kind of electrical signals that fatiguing a frog's leg muscle would give you. So that he was, showing that our usual distinction between living and non-living is not all that clear. That we try to get criterions for what's alive and what's not alive. And it's interesting, I've been listening to a course that's looking for the origins of life. And he spent a whole lecture on how we don't really have a good definition for what life is that everybody can agree on, that it's not that clear-cut. And of course, those things come up with ethical problems of, when is somebody dead? When do you declare somebody dead? And when do you pull the plug? And we've all heard famous cases on the news about the problems that families have and legal battles between different components of the family arguing one way or the other and so forth. And you have the same problem with abortion laws and so forth, is defining when life starts and when it ends is not at all easy. And as Dr. Vos was pointing out, you can't even draw a clear distinction between what's alive and what's not alive. And as John Dobson said, the whole universe is alive, if you want to put it that way. I had an interesting incident once. I was talking to a class, or I was going to be talking to a world religions class that came here to the temple, and the carloads came at different times. So one carload with a few students came quite early, much earlier than the others. And so there's one student, so I thought, well, just got some time, we'll just get to know each other. So I asked him what he liked to do and that sort of thing. He says, I like working with metals and making knives. And so first of all, that's okay. And then he just kind of blew me away. He says, the metals tell me what they want me to do with them. I said, we got a Leonardo of metals here that is tuning into the vibration of the metals. So do you want to read one more paragraph? We've got time for one more paragraph.
Now the
Assuming
question.
it's not an infinite paragraph, which it may be.
Now the question.
Yeah.
Now the question may arise, how should we apply this to our social life? That's very easy. We should not be narrow, but we should carry that ideal of unity and variety in all the different stages of our social life. Just as two faces are not alike, so no two minds are alike. Your path is chalked out for you by the Lord himself, and I must be tolerant, and I must allow you to grow in your own way. Just as in a garden, there are different kinds of trees, and you do not try to make two trees look alike. Do you try to make two trees bear the same fruit? You would be destroying all the trees. Sorry, friends, this world is a garden, and each individual is just like a plant. Let him grow and bear his own fruit. Allow him to grow. That should be your ideal. Why should you hinder his growth and progress? Take your hands off. Take all the limitations off and let him grow free, and he will bear the best fruit. But before he can bear the best fruit, you must give him proper environments. Just as a plant cannot give the best fruit unless you give it proper light and heat and the nourishment of the earth, air, and water, which are the environments under which a plant will bear its best fruit. So you make him manifest the highest ideal of his life by giving him proper conditions. That is your duty. Why should you hate a Chandala? Why is he a Chandala? Because you have made him so. You can make him a Brahmin tomorrow if you allow him all the proper environments of a Brahmin. But do not blame him because he lives in filth and dirt and is unclean. Why is he so? Because you have made him like that. And now, after putting down in the lowest rank and giving him all the conditions that would be degrading to him, you blame him, condemn him, and hate him. It is not the Chandala who should be blamed, but you, the leaders of the society.
Okay, I guess it's a good place to stop. I just have a couple more comments. I remember as a teacher realizing that students learn different ways and have, find different methods. So if I'm teaching like a math class or a chemistry class, there's not just one way to solve a problem. There are lots of ways to solve a problem. But the dilemma is some people would get confused. They didn't want me to give them 3 different ways to solve a problem, just because some people could do it better this way than that way. Oh, don't tell us all that. It just confuses me, So, but I would anyway, and I would just have to explain, pick a method, and if that method works for you, stick to it, and you can ignore what I'm saying now. And hopefully somebody else will find one of these other methods useful to them. And I remember as a kid, I had just one lesson. My mother was smart enough not to sign me up with this music teacher. She wanted me to play exactly like her. She would play a passage and I was supposed to duplicate it. That's, as Abhedananda says, that's really not a very good way to do it. If we all sounded exactly alike, we might as well just listen to a recording of Horowitz and call it quits. Nobody else needs to learn how to play. It's the joy of having individual differences in performances that make music interesting. And that's the mark of a good teacher, is to be able to bring out the individuality of the student and not just try to make them some carbon copy of themselves. All right, well, let's close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Peace, peace, peace. Yes.